It's a cold and snowy evening here. So I guess it's time to review another camera. How's it going today, YouTube? So the camera I decided to look at this evening is this. This is the Fuji GS645 Professional Wide60 camera. Quite a mouthful of a name, but a very excellent travel camera if you want to shoot medium format for about the same size as a 35mm SLR or a digital SLR camera. So of course this camera, being a 6x4.5 camera, takes medium format film, either 120 or 220, which looks like this. And it's a much different form factor than what most people think of for medium format cameras. Because obviously one of the most iconic medium format cameras is the Hasselblad, and this is a Kiev copy of a Hasselblad. And you can see it's very square, it's very heavy, it's a all-metal camera, while this looks more akin to what a 35mm camera would look like. And because this is kind of a weird square shape, it's hard to carry, whereas this has a traditional grip like you would have on a more traditional camera. Another great thing about it is it's actually not that big. As you can see, compared to this Holga, other than the rangefinder portion up here, they're about the same dimensions. Let me put them back to back. But unlike the Holga, which has pretty much no settings and gives you a Lomo looking image, this Fuji camera has an amazingly sharp, high quality Fuji lens and full control along with the built-in light meter. Now I'm going to walk you around the outside of the camera. One of the most iconic portions of this camera is this lens. As you can see, there's this metal bar around the outside that people call the crash bar. Now this was designed because the shutter that Fuji used on this camera, in testing, they figured out that if you were walking around with this camera and something hit the side of the lens, you could shear off some threads in there and completely ruin your camera. And this was very hard to repair. So their design included this crash bar, which protects the lens from being hit against things. I wish the lens wasn't that fragile in the first place, but this is a good idea and a good compromise anyway, since this is more of a street photography, lightweight, carry everywhere camera. If you have it hanging off your back, the last thing you want is to hit it against a wall or something and scratch up the lens. So it has a good purpose. It doesn't really hinder your access to the camera controls because they're all on the side here. Nothing requires you to get up towards this bar. So it's decently well designed. It is a plastic exterior camera, but it feels really solid. It's not a cheap, thin plastic. It's like a polycarbonate. It is a glossy polycarbonate though, so take with that what you will, you know. Getting fingerprints all over the camera. That does happen, but it's more of an aesthetic thing than a practical thing. It's a rock solid camera. The top and bottom plates though have some metal components like the rewind lever, and all of the things around the lens are made of metal. So all the controls on this camera are around the lens. And let me orient this so that we can read it and get it nice and close to the camera. Great. So the first thing on the front of the lens is the shutter speed here. And the setting you've chosen is on this red line. So there's 1 second all the way through 1/500th of a second. The next thing is the aperture ring, which you can see here goes from f4 to f22. It's certainly not the widest aperture. A lot of medium format high quality lenses go to f2.8, but for the size, it's a decent compromise. And since you're shooting medium format, your image quality is so much higher that you could probably go to a higher ISO film than have to worry about going to the shallower apertures. And you can control the aperture ring from the bottom of the camera. There's a piece for your finger to rest on and slide it. And then finally we have the focus. The close focus is 1 meter, and it does have a depth of field scale, which is handy for street shooting. Another handy factor in this camera is that even though all 3 of these adjustments are close to each other, they're all different. The focusing tab is curved in and has a square texture to it. The aperture tab is kind of flat and long, and it has ridges on it rather than square ripples. And the shutter speed tab is just like the aperture tab, but it has square ripples. So they all feel different, and it's nice that they put the aperture wing down here so that all 3 of these could never be in the same place and interfere with each other. So a little cramped, but definitely something you can get used to. I usually hold the camera like this and use my thumb to focus and adjust the settings like this. Okay, now that we've looked at the lens of the camera, let's look on the top here. There is a hot shoe. There is the shutter button here, which has a lock, which is nice. You can see the little L there. So when it's up, it's unlocked, and you can see here with the arrow, pull it down to lock. So you can't fire the shutter there. You can fire the shutter there. It does have a cable release thread on it. Here's the frame counter. And here it reminds you that if you're shooting 120 film in this camera, you get 15 exposures. And if you're shooting 220 film, you get 30 exposures. Now this is a little controversial. That some cameras you can get 16 exposures on 120 film. In fact, even the Holga here, you can get 16 exposures on 120 film. But a lot of these cameras that automatically track the 120 film only give you 15. And I don't know if that has to do with the reliability of the mechanism. It may also be just because they don't want the film to rub on both sides of the frame as it travels. So any place inside the transport where it'll rub is on a place where your pictures won't be. I don't know. Either way, it gives a good spacing between the negatives so that you can easily trim them and not cut too close to the images. It is a bit of a shame though that you can't get that extra shot, because there's definitely room to do that on the film, but this camera just didn't do it. On the back of the camera, we have a convenient reminder window. If you don't know what this is for, you take a section of the film box and you slide that in here to help remind you what film you're using. Underneath the reminder window is another window that tells you if the film is set up for 120 or 220 film. There's another switch up here that you have to switch depending on whether you're using 120 or 220 film. Serial number here. On the bottom of the camera, you'll see this is the tripod socket. This is the opening for the batteries. It takes 2 LR44 batteries, so probably the most standard watch battery there is, so easy to find, nothing weird. These 2 circles will have a purpose in loading the film that I'll show you later. Back to the front of the camera, there's a PC cord. It's kind of weird that the PC cord is way down here in the bottom left corner because, for example, my Vivitar flash has a PC cable and it's not long enough to reach between this and here. So if I put the flash up here and I ran a PC cord to here, it wouldn't reach. You could get a longer PC cord, but kind of a weird choice to put it way down here in this corner. Usually you see PC cords on the lenses of cameras like this. Another interesting feature is that it has another tripod socket on this side of the camera. And that actually turns out to be very important because if you've noticed, or if you look, when I open the back of the camera, by opening the back, by flipping this down and then pushing it down, the film runs this way through the camera, like this, from here to here. But because it's a 6x4.5 camera, the frame is vertical. So by holding the camera in a standard way like this, you actually get portrait orientation photos. So the tripod socket on this side of the camera is so that when it's on a tripod, you could decide to shoot landscape orientation photos. This has a very interesting result in that because it's easier to hold the camera this way, most of your photos are in portrait mode just because it's what you think about when you're composing with this camera. So most of my images that are with the frame in portrait mode have come from this camera just because it's easier to shoot portrait in this camera. A very bizarre setup. Before I talk about the inside of this anymore, I want to show you inside the viewfinder to show you what a rangefinder looks like. Now this is gonna look really terrible because this camera's lens is not small enough, but let me bring the viewfinder up to the camera. And what you can see inside the viewfinder is the frame. That yellow box is what you'll take a picture of. And if you see in the middle there, there's a yellow circle. You turn, you can see right about here, there's like a ghost of an image moving by. And what you do is you turn the focusing ring until the ghost of an image in that yellow circle lines up with the real image of the camera. Now this hole goes too close for me to focus on it for real, but that's what you would do in a rangefinder camera. You have to point that yellow dot there, at what you want to focus on, and then turn the ring until the thing you see in that yellow dot isn't doubled. Both images of the thing merge into one. And that's how you know you're in focus. You'll also notice as I turn the focus that the frame lines move up there in that corner if you see them moving there. And that's because this camera corrects for parallax, which means that the viewfinder is here but the lens is here. So as you focus closer, what you're seeing in the lens is actually here, but the viewfinder is seeing past it. So the lines shrink in on that side to tell you that your object is actually down there. And so you don't have to think about it. There's no parallax issues with the rangefinder on this camera. Another interesting feature is if you look right here, there's actually a hidden gray lever that has T on it. And that's because this camera doesn't have B for bulb, which is an exposure where you hold the shutter button as long as you want to take an exposure. Instead, this is T, which means the shutter stays open on its own without you having to hold something. So all you do is simply cock the camera, put the shutter speed on anything really, and then get some object to prod that button down. As you can see, the lens is now open without me touching anything on the camera. To then close the shutter, all you do is you push the shutter button. There you go. And then of course wind to the next frame. Next, I'm going to show you how to load this camera. Now I'm going to go about this assuming somebody has never loaded 120 film before, assuming this is their very first 120 camera. Now first, to get the back open, the lever is on the right side here. You rotate it down 90 degrees and then you push. And there's the back. Now this is 120 film. And it's obvious it's 120 film because it says 120 all over it. If you happen to find some 220 film, which is the same as 120 film, but it's twice as long, then there are two things you have to do with this camera. First thing is, this is the pressure plate. You push it down, slide it to the left, and release, so this metal disc is closer to the 220. To remind you of that, the back of the camera magically switches between 120 and 220 on this little window when you move this back and forth. The next thing you have to do is move this switch up here. 120 is showing now. If you flick it to this side, now 220 is showing. Now the camera is ready for 220 film. As an additional reminder, here on the top, it reminds you again that 220 film will give you 30 exposures, 120 film will give you 15 exposures, so you know what to look for in your frame counter window. So why is there all of this complication? Well, that's because this camera automatically tracks the 120 film. This may seem pretty commonplace in a 35mm camera, having a window here to tell you how many frames are left. But on 120 cameras, the traditional way is with this red window like on the Holga. This red window has numbers showing inside. Those numbers are actually printed on this paper on the outside of the film. So as it travels by, you stop at every number, and that's every exposure. This camera acts more like a 35mm camera, where there's this wheel here that counts how much film has gone by and gives you an actual number. So there's no guessing. The frame spacing is consistent, just like a 35mm camera. Because of that, the camera has no way to know whether you've put 120 or 220 in it. There's no DX code for 120 film, so you have to tell it that you've put 120 or 220 in. Anyways, the actual process of loading. Now, depending on how you acquire the camera, there may be one of these already inside, either in here or in here. This is simply just the plastic core that the film is on, so there's one that the film is wrapped around here. You need two. So if you have some film, but for some reason your camera didn't come with one of these, you're going to have to either go online, or if there's an actual photo lab somewhere in your area, ask them, because they'll have tons of these that they're just going to be throwing out if they develop 120 film, and they'll happily give you a few probably. So what you need to do is, first you need to push these two red buttons right here. What these do is these pop out one side of the spool holder out of the bottom of the camera. You saw these two pop out. Now what you need to do is, what I do actually is use the winder, and let me get nice and close here so you can see this. You wind until this metal piece, which has a slot, line it up so that slot is vertical. That'll help you get the spool in easier. Now you take the empty spool, and you can put it in either way, it doesn't matter. Put it in so that this notch lines up with the notch in that metal piece, like so, in the top, and then set the bottom in the camera. Then you push the knob on the bottom in. Now the spool is locked into the camera, and you can prove that by spinning the wind and firing the camera. Now what you're going to want to do is you rotate the spool until the slot is on the top. So like there. Next, you're going to take your 120 film, and you're going to carefully remove, while holding on to the film itself, carefully completely remove this holding piece of paper. Now again, after I remove this holded piece of paper, I always try to pinch this part of it at all times, because if you let go, it may unravel and expose your film, which is bad. Now you need to carefully unfold this part. This is the leader of 120 film. And you do the same thing on this side as this side, but there's no notch to line up here. You simply insert drop it in, and again, see I'm still holding the paper, and then push in the button on the bottom. Now, while still keeping tension on this and making sure it doesn't unwind, I slide the paper over, and then what I do, see my pinky's still over here holding on, just to be safe. I then insert this tab into the slot of this spool. A little difficult to do through a viewfinder, but there, I've inserted it up to the fold. Now, while holding on to that as well, I start slowly winding. So now you can see that inserting that tab into the slot is enough to hold it in on this side and start moving the film across. Now notice I'm still keeping my fingers here touching the spool on either side so it stays tight, and I keep winding the lever. Now you do this slowly until you see the start with the arrows. Now all you have to do is line up the start with the arrows with this start arrow right there. So let's do that. It doesn't have to be exact. There, that's plenty good enough. And that's it. Now you can let go of the spool there and close the back of the camera. Fold that up. Again, make sure you're on the right setting. So let me flip that back to 120. This is on 120 because I put 120 film in. Now all you have to do is keep winding until the wind lever stops. It'll automatically stop at frame 1. There, I'm at frame 1 because I can't wind anymore. Make sure your shutter is locked, obviously, so you don't push this, and now you're ready to go carry the camera around and shoot. One last thing I want to talk about is the light meter. If you look very carefully between the shutter speed and the aperture rings on the lens, it does have film speed settings here. And there's a little knurled section right there that you gotta hold on to the shutter, sorry, you have to hold on to the aperture ring and carefully slide this little orange mark till you get to the right film speed. I have 100 ISO film in the camera, as indicated by the 100 in the name of the film. So I'm at 100 ISO and I'm ready to shoot the camera. This camera does have a light meter, so if you half press the shutter button, you get a light meter to show up in the viewfinder. Let's see if I can show you that. You can see the light there. Now what you'll see in the viewfinder, I'm going to use a super bright light here to fool it into thinking I'm outside. You'll see up top there's a plus, and then if the exposure is correct, you get the middle, the circle in the middle. And if your exposure is going to be too low, you get the minus sign at the bottom. So then you have to adjust the shutter speed and aperture, just like you would on a 35mm camera that has a 3-light or a needle-based exposure system. So shutter speed and aperture, it's too dark. Shutter speed and aperture pretty much dead on. Shutter speed and aperture set such that it'll be too bright. So that's that. Oh, and one other thing I forgot. I should probably make a list for these so I don't keep forgetting. There's actually a self-timer on this camera as well. If you look right here, there is a teeny tiny metal, shiny metal bit right there. You simply take that and crank it down, and you'll actually hear it start making cocking noises. You go zzzt. And then by pressing the shutter button, you'll activate the timer. It's about 8 seconds. And that's about it for this camera. Wonderful camera to carry around. Build quality is not the best. Again, this whole idea of having to guard the lens from knocks by putting this roll cage on it. But in terms of having a medium format camera that has all manual control and a light meter to help you out, this is a great camera to carry around anywhere where you need a little more image quality. That's about it. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and let me know if there's any other cameras or things you want me to talk about. And if I have them, then I'll happily prioritize talking about one of those next. So again, thank you for watching.